Well, whatever the changes are in this year's budget, you can bet there will still be a sizable deficit. The reason why, according to Liberal Democratic Senator David Leyonhjelm, was that each budget is too similar to the last one, with only relatively small changes made to spending and taxes overall. He wants a total overhaul. He joins me now. Thank you for your time today, Senator. You've been talking about a combination of top-down and bottom-up budgets. Explain to people what that means exactly.
Yes, this is the fourth year that I've done an alternative budget. The first 2 years were just about where to cut. Last year, all of them have included where to cut. The first two were just where to cut. The third year, last year, was how to sell it. So talking about a haircut for everybody, spreading the load and making it more palatable to people to see that cutting the budget was feasible. This year, I have talked about where to cut, but more I've talked about the process of arriving at a budget which makes sense. The current process of arriving at a budget is idiotic, it's historical. As you said, it's a mixture of top-down and bottom-up. The bottom-up, I think, is probably the more crucial aspect of it, and that is where you essentially say, we're not going to take last year's budget and just add 10% or deduct 10% or anything else. We're going to say, what actually are we here for? Every department would do that. Every government agency that spends taxpayers' money would do that. What are we here for? What do we have to do? Let's start from a blank sheet of paper and cost everything that we have to do. And inevitably, you would find things that don't need doing anymore. We're just doing them because we've done them in the past and no one's thought to challenge them.
And within that, you've also said, let's take a look at the size of governments in successful foreign countries and mimic that. Now, the first thing that comes to mind, I don't know whether it says more about me than anything else, are those very happy, successful, wealthy Scandinavian countries with big governments.
Yes, and I've allowed for the possibility in my alternative budget that you might decide that the current size of government is okay. And you can legislate that if you want to. And that would be a good thing because it would mean that you would stop increasing. Or if you said, well, look, the current size, 35–37% of GDP, is still a bit low, we could go to 40. Well, let's stop at 40. But at the moment, its growth is occurring organically with no plan, no idea of where we're going to stop. You know, if it reaches 100%, we're going to say, oh, is that high enough, you know?
You've spoken as well about $100 billion in potential areas of spending that if you made cuts in there, you wouldn't need to legislate it. What specifically are you talking about there?
Yes, there's $100 billion of spending in the budget which doesn't require legislation to wind back. There's quite a lot of areas where that could be. It would include defence, communication, so the ABC, SBS funding, for example, could be removed without a bill going through the Senate and getting blocked. There are actually quite a lot of areas where that spending could occur. Now, the reason I mentioned that in my article in the Financial Review is that it's usually argued, oh, well, government can't wind back spending because the Senate will block it. What I'm really saying is there's $100 billion worth of spending which is not subject to Senate blocking, which if the government had the gumption, it could do something about winding back the deficit. I've also discussed the fact that the Senate's not what it used to be, and they shouldn't be afraid to have another go at it.
And just on that point, yeah, you mentioned Nick Xenophon. Do you think he's more amenable to making some of the cuts in the other main areas of spending? Any specific bits of legislation you're getting a whisper of that he might change his mind on?
Oh, no, Nick doesn't signal his intentions like that. But my view is that he now realises what responsibility he bears. He can determine whether the country goes broke or not, basically. That's really what it amounts to. That's a big responsibility. And I don't think he wants to send the country broke. Certainly not South Australia anyway, maybe he doesn't care about the rest of the country. So my thinking is that he would be amenable to the idea of a co-payment, for example, on Medicare, on pharmaceuticals, a reduction in expenditure on higher education by increasing the share taken up by HECS, which Christopher Pyne tried to achieve when he was an education minister. There's a whole series of things which the government tried in the previous parliament, which were knocked back in the old Senate. because it was dominated. The crossbench was dominated by people who love spending money. I think Nick would be take a different approach these days.